So, first question from us.
So the first suggestion, which is the classics, with my classics hat on it picks up on what you've been talking about, Thebes. And one way in which you can think about Homer's representation of the Iliad is the way it appropriates the Theban tradition, which was, again, about a war at Thebes. So I love the idea that he circles around Thebes, going out, like you were saying, got the spokes from the centre, as if you're in a wheel, but then you don't mention Thebes. And that, to me, fits exactly the kind of narrative strategy that Homer conducts throughout the Iliad, so that by the time you get to the end of the Iliad, you don't need the Theban tradition, you don't need another epic about a siege and a sack, because he's given you one, which was about Troy. So I love the idea that Thebes, you know, is almost confronted at explicitly being the first, Boeotia being the first catalogue itinerary, but you don't mention Thebes. I think that's great. So maybe that's kind of interesting for you. But then with my digital humanities hat on, I guess I want to know what kind of text you're using here. How are you getting all of this digital information? Are you annotating the text yourself, or what are you doing? So how are these places being identified? You mentioned Pleiades.
Yeah.
So what's the kind of background text?
So to identify the places, we use a number of resources. Pleiades is really one of the main resources. We try to locate a site on Pleiades, and then Neatline allows you to create an item. So we would create an item for that particular place, and we would plot that location in the item, save the item that way, according to what Pleiades told us.
So you're using, I noticed you're using Greek at the bottom there. Is Greek that you've had to type in yourself, or that you've got the...
Courtney, you covered that.
What, the Greek?
Well, yeah, how did you enter the Greek?
Well, we just entered it. I made cut and paste, I think, through from TLG.
Is it TLG or the Chicago Homer?
Well, the translation, I think, the Homer translations, in the bottom of this background section, that's from the Chicago Homer.
Okay.
The other stuff is probably TLG.
So TLG, aren't they a bit particular about how you use their texts? Isn't there like copyright issues with using TLG?
This is really a sample. So
I'm not trying to respond here, but
No, but when we get when the site goes public, we will have sought all of the necessary.
I was also wondering whether you mean Perseus, of course, do their own. They've got this huge online classical library, and they annotate the text themselves, so they have markup. In English, for sure, whether they're doing, I think they're doing Greek text as well, are they on their table? So and Perseus are open. So on my question being, why not use Perseus?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Well, when I did my my book, where I needed substantial chunks of Homer, both the Lattimore and the Oxford text, which I used. I got permission from both Chicago and from Oxford. There I needed about 5 books. I seem to think that's a problem. So I think it's important to get the permission, but they're pretty free with it. Yeah. They may actually change that now because there's a new edition of the Lattimore translation, and then but Chicago gave us permission.
I don't have a real question, it's more like a comment. So I found really fascinating the idea of using the digital tool as a way to formulate an argument. At least this was the idea I got from the talk. And the more I was listening to the talk, the more were coming to my mind things that I wanted to put in the argument and to see, and actually data to cross-match and to combine. For instance, it would be interesting to see, because I saw kind of 2 strands of the argument. One was the itineraries and the geographical argument. So I would be interested to see ancient roads and so on. And on the other hand, there is more the literary argument. So places mentioned together in other sources. I understand it's a lot of work, of course, but I see some tools actually converging together. So, for instance, the Pleiades Project, which is trying to use geographical name places as an entry point to literary text, for instance, could be an interesting source to combine into this, because you can get places mentioned in other works, perhaps in a collocation in the same sentence or line and so on. But yeah, I don't know how much I have with it. It's more, I see really a big potential in this kind of use of it.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And we've begun to move in that direction, although we haven't had, the full time to get started with that. But if you look, for instance, at the Argos exhibit, we have bibliography for those roads posted. So that is, if you were to click on this road, this will list some helpful bibliography, and eventually this will all be, each road will be an individual item.
And where's this information coming from? Are you having to do that again yourself? Or are you grabbing this information from elsewhere?
No, I'm just entering that information. So it is a lot of work. It is a lot of work. There is, however, a new version of Neatline coming out in the new year sometime, which should be even more streamlined. It is it's a lot of work, but it is a very easy and intuitive program to use. So I really encourage you to look in the new year, sometime in the new year, there should be Neatline 2.0. There will be a huge manual that accompanies it. But as far as the places go, sorting through all the other literature, I mean, that's a great suggestion, and we try to start doing that already, and I hope to do more of it.
Just to follow up on what Matteo was saying, I've been running the Pleiades Project, and that's precisely the idea is that it's a way to connect resources on the web. So don't feel as though you have to do all this yourself. Basically, there's a lot of stuff going on out there, lots of other people working on literature, archaeological data. Pleiades is a way that allows you as a user to go from one resource to another. So, and the glue of Pleiades is Pleiades. Right. So you guys have already done that, so you can join us. That's kind of my pitch to you.
Thanks, great.
Okay.
Yes.
So I would like to pick up on your final remark that a lot of data does not fit. And for example, in Thebes you have the spokes, but with one of the spokes, for example, you have places in one direction and the other direction. So it's quite fascinating to have the idea of seven, whatever the word was, and the corresponding spokes. I'm not sure if it really works. So could you really actively rule out a very simple other hypothesis that you have simply regions, say 6 regions in the Peloponnese, and then one goes through this region and says, okay, I take one region and go through the places that I know in this region, and I have some bits of structure, like things that are mentioned somewhere together, or some cities that come together in some reason, or bits of street of roads. But in the end, there is a strong element, or there seems to be a strong element of randomness, that he doesn't go the road in this way, in this direction, but in that direction. Can you rule out things like the size of the places, or the number of things that are involved in every place, and things like that?
Well, one possibility that we haven't talked about, but I think I bet we'll come up with such a plotting, is to again have a center, but to not necessarily in spokes, but to mark the edges of a region. That seems like a perfectly reasonable way to define space. And so we may find that. And I think the problem with the traditional material is that simply kicks the can down the road. Why are these places in a tradition? That's a question that, again, deserves answering. But the fact that they are traditional, that they may have been used in the catalogue, that is taken from different traditions, from different local traditions possibly, is of course very important. So messy is, we're not too upset about messy. And that makes it more interesting. And it will keep us making many hypotheses, some of which will be convincing and some will not.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I also think if different hypotheses and their consequences can be visualized, that is a lot. In fact, you can't resolve all the questions of the ship catalog with this. So any kind of bored, bad-mooded traditional guy can say, well, if you had drawn that on paper, you got to the same thing, you know, in terms of analytics. But naturally, we know that there is more about that, also connecting resources with hypotheses, and I think that is a pose, as far as I see, this is the unique point of Neatline now. I don't know, you can't do that really with the Pleiades of today, you can't do that with Pleiades, you can't do that with any other tool I know, not with the tools of the DAI. Sit down and start using it as a resource for, you know, telling a story or putting up some questions, putting up some hypotheses. So you have a real tool that, if then it could more neatly interact with other tools, that would be perfect. You know, say, taking the stuff from an online resource like Perseus, get the enriched version over Pleiades, having the backbone of Pleiades behind that, but being able to tell your story, being able to lay out your thinking about anything, like the ship catalog, for example. And I mean, also the under the informational level, also the non-fitting data is just another level of the discussion that must be addressed. It's just another level. The fitting and the seemingly fitting and seemingly unfitting, to address them and to separate them into different levels. Then you're really a step further down the road, and it is in the end probably that is also making sense of the ship catalog. Always, you know, circling about all the old questions: is that oral? Is that not oral? Can that be oral? If it is made up of so many different and very differentiated things, are we in a position to really pin down something that happened somewhere in the time where we want to locate Homer in a fingerprint mood, saying could he done that? How could he have done that? How could he have done this? I don't know. I don't see us in this kind of position. But if we can have a, so to say, an informational map about the structure and elements in this huge amount of information, that's the point. Yeah. I would feel released by this.
I mean, you point to another potential function that we have not actually begun to address.
Yeah.
So, like these roads that we've plotted here, the testimony for those roads comes from all sorts of different time periods, and we just haven't had the time to actually go through and label them as such. But you know, if you could find a way to point out what information was probably Mycenaean, what information was archaic, what information we don't have any testimony for until Roman times, you know, that would be, again, showing the many layers and pointing out the many problems, but hopefully circling towards some sort of deeper understanding.
Unfortunately, I came late. Did you say how much work went into the Civil War battle visualization? Which is in a way your seems to be your punch.
You know,
So
that was done by David McClure, who's at the Scholars Lab, and he's done a lot of, he's helped us out a lot.
Yeah.
He and Jeremy at the Scholars Lab have been extraordinarily helpful. So that was a sample by David McClure. His other demos are all on the web as well, on the Neatline.
But for just in hours of personal month, what would you say? Or personal years?
Well, you know, learning, becoming more of a technological person, and trying to figure out how to use all the sources and enter them in efficiently. And it took time, I would say. It took time, but once you were to get accustomed, and if you had all of the sources at your fingertips, if this was something you were specialized in, you'd been working at, something like this would not take you very much time at all. I mean, once you knew Neatline and you say you were a much more experienced person than I, you could really make an exhibit like this probably the night before class if you wanted to.
Yeah. No, that would be another big selling point.
Yeah.
Are there any other? Yes.
Sorry, I arrived late, maybe you have said it before. I just wanted to know, you say that you use sometimes Strabo to use the information about the catalog. Is there a way to use the other ancient scholarship in your map? Apollodorus or Demetrius, is it a way to use them, to use the evidence from ancient scholarship on your map? Or how do you do that?
I don't know if we've thought about how to incorporate, say, although it was an early idea at some point to incorporate, say, Strabo's trip around Boeotia and around Greece, as well as Pausanias. Though I don't know where we are about that, but certainly we will eventually have passages of Strabo and Pausanias where they talk about each place. Some of that information is there in roads. There's a road that goes to a place called Glissos, and the only way we know about this road is because Pausanias says it's the straight road to Glissos from Thebes. So yeah, absolutely, some of that information is there. But yeah, did that answer your question?
I mean, if I could just follow up on that. I mean, there are a bunch of different ways that you could imagine incorporating sources external to Homer. You could make a map, as Courtney says, you know, mapping Strabo's trip versus Pausanias' trip around, say, Boeotia. You could, if you believe the picture table actually stems from ancient sources, you could make a compressed version of the Catalogue of Ships and have a sort of strange, mutated version of the catalog as a separate exhibit related to the exhibit that we've already shown you. But then there's bibliographic information as well. You could include Strabo, a citation of Strabo in a particular item for a particular location of a city, say, or of a road. So there's all different ways, potentially, if you have the time. But
well, like you said, you should be drawing on other material.
yeah, we should be more. Yeah, I think that's right.
I have a more technical question. How easy and how do you actually export things from Neatline? Is there any mechanism to, because I see, you might spend some time in inputting data. Is there a format to get the data out of it? Because following the argument of formulating the argument with Neatline, actually you can allow people to download your data and test them with their own Neatline. In this case, becomes like a way of replicating the same results that you achieved. So the question is really simple. How do you export locations and also the narrative and related information from Neatline?
Oh, that may be a simple question, but
I mean, I guess there must be
mechanisms in place to do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we should poke around and get back to you. And that's a really good question. I mean, again, it's the ease of integration with other resources that maybe that should be more obvious. if we who have been working with this for weeks, months, don't actually know, maybe this kind of thing should be more obvious. Yeah. Or maybe it's just us.
No, but I saw that Neatline as a tool is quite well documented, so it might actually be there somewhere.
Yeah, it might be. It probably is. Yeah. That's a good question.
Well, I'm sure, I don't know how the Neatline stuff gets out, but where Neatline is actually drawing most of its information from are is Omeka and Dublin Core, that sort of stuff. So Neatline is actually built around that, and most of our data that we've put in is put in through Omeka. So presumably Omeka can be mined by other programs, right? Again, I don't know how, I'm not a computer person per se, but surely that's a possibility, right?
Yeah. Any other question? If not, we thank again the speakers and we move to the